Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today on this event that's been hosted by TechHa. TechHa is Tech Project Women's Initiative, popularly called TechHa NG. This event is co-sponsored by Connected Development. Today, we're having a conversation around people, movements, and technologies. Our conversation is stemming from the things that have happened around our country, the incidents of October, and even beyond October 20th. We are looking at how, in all of this madness that has overtaken this country, how people have utilized technology to make calls to action, to push and push and push at institutions that have been set up basically to terrorize its citizens. We have a few people who are familiar names. Please ignore the fact that a lot of people seem to be Nana Nwachukwu today. I'm not so sure who they are. But yes, hopefully we'll find who they truly are. I'm the only authentic Nana anyway. Welcome to today's conversation. I'm going to yield the room. I'm sorry. Wow. Okay. I'm going to yield the room to Hamzi Lawal. I'm not sure if Hamzi is in this room because there seems to be a lot of Nana Wachukus again. Thank you, Hamzat. I'm going to yield the room to Hamzat to give us a few remarks before we go and deep dive into the conversation that we have today. Thank you very much. Hamzi, please. Oh, it appears Hamzat is not ready.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Awesome. My name is Hamzat Lawal, and I'm really excited that Choma have brought all of us together on the Tech Hub platform to have a conversation around movement and the aftermath of the NSAS campaign. Movement building and leading have brought about democratic change, mobilizing voices, galvanizing voices, and ensuring that citizens are able to entrench the dividends of democracy. I'm really excited that some of my friends are part of the panelists, some people who have led movements, who have mobilized citizens, and most importantly, shaped conversation that hopefully will take Nigeria to the next level. My role here is just to say that we appreciate you, and Connected Development that I lead is happy to support this kind of conversation. And I look forward to learning from our panelists and of course, collecting questions from all the attendees. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Hamzat, for that very, very short opening remarks. We're going to the first panel for today is going to be talking about the role and the evolution of technology in movements from 2011 to 2020. I'm going to introduce the moderator of the panel, Mariam Laushi, who's going to introduce the components of the panel and the people who are going to talk about the role and the evolution of technology in movements. Mariam, please, over to you.
Hi, Nana. Thank you so much. I guess for some reason it's also saying Nana Wachuku on mine as well. But just to clarify to everyone, my name is Mariam Laushi. I'm not sure how this happened. Um, Going forward into this panel, I think it's a really important one. We're looking at the role of technology like over the years since 2011 until now, how technology has really taken like a huge role in the movements, youth movements, all the movements that we've kind of seen, come to life in more than like 10 years, 20 years in Nigeria so far, in about 10 years mainly. So I'm just going to introduce our panelists because they have the wealth of knowledge and we're going to kind of hear from them. And so on our panel today, I'm really excited. I'm a fan of, the people on this panel. So I'm really excited to introduce them. And first we have, in no particular order, Odun Aweni. Um, we also have Chioma Ogwegbu. We have Benga Sesan and Rotimi Olawale. Would you guys like to say hi?
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, everyone.
All right, you're all welcome. So let's just like dive straight into it. And I'm going to start with the first question. Um, maybe Chama would help us take this one. The role of the internet, specifically the deployment of social media in organizing protest movements, cannot be overlooked, especially at the level witnessed during, NSAS. So how much has this changed at the like over the last decade, and what are the lessons we can take from this?
Okay. Hi, everyone. So I just saw on the charts that we're talking about 2010 from 2010, not 2011. So if I started from
Yeah.
2010, I think I would start from like a more global outlook, and then maybe bring it home to Nigeria because from the days of the Arab Spring to the Occupy Nigeria, Occupy movement in general, and then the Enough is Enough movement, and up till the present day. Um, Technology has been in use, and over the years we have seen that it has evolved. So when, for instance, we did Enough is Enough, there were no mobile phones that had things like live camera features, for instance. Or we could do a mobile. I think it was BlackBerry, but Android phones were not that generally available that we could mobilize on. But we had Facebook and we had emails and text messages, and those were the platforms that we used at that time to kind of mobilize. But then over the years, it has become more. There are more and more platforms, and more because of the accessibility of technology in general, the availability of cell phones, the price of data is now more affordable. So 10 years ago, 11, 12 years ago, before you could buy data, you needed like 5,000 naira to get data. So essentially opened up our ability to use, to use social media or to use technology in general to mobilize. And yeah, so maybe I'll stop here now, and maybe someone else. Or if it's okay, I can go ahead.
Yes, just for the second part of the question about like lessons that we've learned from some of these movements in terms of technology.
Okay, so of course, some of the tools that have been used are just tools that were used offline before, but because of technology, we're able to use them. So things like crowdfunding, for instance. Um, Crowdfunding is now something that you can do easily. You can share. You have a link where you can use a GoFundMe. You can use local fundraising links. You can use. Initially, before it was that okay, you have to donate money to like it was more difficult for you to actually raise money. But technology has made crowdfunding easy. And then things like live streaming, for instance, I think I mentioned that earlier. Before, for you to set up a live stream of an event, you'd have to have special cameras, you'd have to have somebody who is tech savvy enough to know how to set up a special camera to link whatever events that you are holding. But now all you need is your cell phone. With platforms like Facebook or even Periscope on Twitter, whatever is happening can be live streamed. And I think it's that immediacy and availability that makes it easy to mobilize, because you can quickly share information. And then things like so I noticed, I saw as well, I think we used that also in the NSAS protest, or it was used in the NSAS protest. The things like projection. So it's a form of protest. You can project on the building and spread whatever information you want to use. Things like using drones. 10 years ago, I'm not sure we had drones. Now drones, you can use drones in protest movements. I'm not sure, I don't remember, but you can use drones in protest movements to kind of capture images, get an aerial view. Those things were not readily available before. So for me, those are some of the lessons that for me, I don't know if they're lessons, but more like takeaways, things that have made building movements easier now is the fact that, all kinds of different technologies, so not just social media, but all kinds of different technologies are being utilized to kind of mobilize people.
All right, thank you for that response. I'm just going to move on to Binga now. And so basically, one of the things that we've witnessed recently is how, not even recently, but like over time, how a lot of the time when people come out to protest or there are movements, it's always plagued with accusations of false or fake news, and we've seen that especially now during the NSAS agitations, how even things that are true are being called fake news, and then things that aren't true, we are expected to believe them to be true. So my question to you is, what are the best ways for the public to, first of all, counter those claims, and then more importantly, ensure that the spread of these fake news or true news that being called fake, is reduced? So that's my question to you.
Thank you, Miriam. I think it's important, from the very beginning to distinguish between two different categories of this. Either you call it disinformation or fake news, as popularized by a political, juggernaut who's not a loser, or you call it, dangerous speech, or as many now call it, hate speech. So there are two different categories. There is the one that is, everybody really knows that this is false information and this is dangerous speech, this is incitement and all that. For that, you will see that it is natural for people to ask questions. By the way, the reality is, because because of the speed of information that comes at us many times, anyone can see some information. You don't check which angle it's coming from and things like that, and you share immediately. I mean, there's that. There is honest mistake of sharing something that you find out later to be false, and you correct yourself. And I will come back to that. But I think it's also important to realize that there is now a second blanket, ready to name anything fake news. Lai Mohammed did what Lai does best just a few minutes or hours ago, lying, talking about no blood and no bodies. Now, reality is, he has said that social media has been used to propagate fake news. Now, this is the second category that you need to be careful of. There are people with an agenda that will model things up and may themselves even introduce mis or disinformation so that they can call everything, what they want to call it. Because obviously what they want to do is to gaslight you and to make you, begin to even ask yourself, did I see what I saw? You live, broadcast something, and show what you want to show, and they ask you to bring your proof. What other proof do you need apart from what I showed you over a long period of time? So I think it's important to kick that out of the room before we then come back to a conversation about authentic misinformation, disinformation, or dangerous speech. In order to undo that, and I think it's in our best interest, to make sure that we discourage such, because if we don't, what will happen is that people with an agenda will then say, oh, by the way, you are responsible for this false information. They will try to create some, cause and effect that doesn't exist and say that protests led to violence. Excuse me? Your incompetence led to the violence, not the protest. So it's important, it's very important for us to make sure that, number one, when we see information, especially in tense moments, when we get information, first of all, check the source of the information. If it looks suspect, for example, if it's claims to be from BBC and it comes by email, and the email address is something.bbc dot something at another domain name.com, you can check. And this tells us something. You have to check, especially when it is tense moments and you realize that pausing for a second or two, which is, by the way, one of the reasons why Twitter has changed the way things work with retweet right now. Before you retweet something that has a link, it asks you, have you even read it before you share it? Because reality is many times there may be headlines that, that are not correct. The other thing is to also be able to create a community code of ethics. And I say this because I know that Lai Mohammed and all other liars with him will say that the way to go is to regulate. By the way, when they say regulate, they don't mean regulate in terms of create standards, they mean control, like China. Because, I mean, I've been working in ICT regulation for a long time, and I know for a fact that that is not the meaning of regulation. Regulation means creating standards, not, forcing control. So that before they come, we ourselves know for a fact that when information is shared, and by the way, this is one of the reasons why the first thing that I looked out for when we started having this conversation, especially during the NSAS protest itself, was to look out for people who were, clarifying things and correcting information. And of course, some of the people on this call were very busy doing that. And there was a dedicated handle, NSAS fact check, FCT check, that was doing that. And it's important that we always do that so that we don't play into the hands of the second category of people, people with an agenda. I'll be happy to speak more about this later.
Okay, thank you so much. For me, like, I didn't even know, but there was just so much that was happening, and the comment you made about gaslighting is so true. So what I'm taking away from this is basically my personal role in spreading these things, and also perhaps showing that some of these claims are not true, just in order to keep things factual and on message. So thank you for that. And I'm going to move on now to Rotimi. And my question for you is, the tech community's incredible ability to adapt to challenges was evident during the NSAS protests and have been that way in the last decade. So what specific steps moving forward can movement builders seek to take as a way of firming up gains beyond just the social media aspect?
Right. I think that a lot of the steps are still very much the same ones that we've taken right now. And around like specific steps, it will be more about like understanding that despite the fact that we have social media, it can be regulated and very well might, right? But the good thing about technology is that it moves faster than like most like regulators or most governments can, and that's a lucky thing. So I'll say that the first thing is, like Wenga said, verify the information before you share it. And then the second thing is be aware of apps that can help you circumvent like factors that don't want you to spread like news or the movement in and of itself. Like I know that there was a flurry of downloads of Signal, of BridgeFi, and of FireChat when we realized that there was a real danger of some apps being shut down, or at those times when internet speeds were like being throttled for whatever reason, and we needed to pass messages across to ourselves. And not just that, technology is great for amplification. So continuing to like sustain the pressure is something that social media has been very versed in. So we must do everything that we can to protect that currency. We must do everything that we can to protect that power. And that involves like us like holding ourselves to certain standards so that when people are clearly trying to circumvent those, we can call it out. If we're not spreading fake news, if everything that we're putting out there is verified and verifiable, then it becomes clear when elements are saying this is fake news for us to be able to counter it. For instance, if you look at all the events of the past 2 weeks, it's been very helpful that we've had videos, we've had geotags, we've had timestamps, we've had like so much technical analysis that it's hard to call true things fake. And that's how we continue to like move with the times and stay ahead of like all of these things.
So I actually wanted to ask you specifically this question. What's the best way? I know you've mentioned some ways, right? But the question is, what's the best way for communities, tech communities, to hold institutions acting undemocratically on behalf of the state, such as financial institutions, telcos, against protest movements and their main actors? And I want you to just speak a little on how even like people who are online can use these platforms, even if you don't have any power, but just as an individual, using my platform to hold some of these organizations accountable. So, yeah.
Honestly, I wish I had better news. It's really hard in a country where like the three arms seem to be working against the people to hold people responsible. But here's the deal. Before this conversation, before everything that's happened in the past couple of weeks, I know for a fact that a lot of young people were not like looking so deeply into our institutions, right? We were not taking that much of an interest in politics, right? A lot of us didn't even know that you needed to obtain court orders to freeze accounts and things like that. But this has happened and has like created an avenue for everyone in the electorate to understand that it's not just tech communities that can hold people accountable. Because to be very honest, we can now see that all of the power that you think you hold is kind of limited if the person who's regulating is determined not to obey those, right? And if the judiciary is complicit, then we actually we have very limited wiggle room than we think we do. So everybody, every human being is now being tasked with like contact your representative, tell them that this is what you want to see, disturb them. Like people are now starting to understand like what the power of the electorate is. Like we know when we watched the Lagos State House and we watched Miss Macaulay from Festac talk about how young people were like always getting high and didn't want to take jobs as panel beaters. We watched what the youth of Amuwo sprung into action to do. That's the kind of platform that each individual has. That's the kind of power you hold. Because as it turns out, you know, the people were loud and that's a good thing. But if we do not exercise the power that we have, and then everyone is going to just be able to get away with everything. There's only so much that tech can do. Tech can amplify, tech can show, tech can sustain, but sustainable change is going to be won by each individual person playing a role and understanding that your platform, limited that may be, you know, you might think you have just 100 followers, but sharing that link is important. Sharing verifiable, verified news is important. So I think that the question to everybody to turn it around isn't just how tech companies or tech institutions can hold people accountable, because whether we like to believe it or not, those companies, those institutions are made up of people, right? And if they're giving instructions, sometimes they insist they have to follow. But at the end of the day, each individual person, each person who's gone out to vote, or each person who's of election age, now has a responsibility, now has a job to do, now realizes that we have more power than we thought we had, and it might be time to use it.
Okay, thank you so much, Odun. I am going to come back to Choma. In the heat of the protests, several resources on what individuals could do to stay connected were circulated due to the threat of possible internet shutdowns. What are internet-related policies that help foster democracy, which we need to, all of us as citizens, kind of rally around to make sure that, you know, our one place of freedom, which is the internet, is not trampled upon.
Okay. But do you mind if I go back a little, because I wanted to add to what Otto had
Yes,
said.
please do.
Okay. She talked about, you know, everyone taking an individual role, and I think if we're doing like an analysis of movements that have from 2010 till now, we find out that in 2019 there's been this, that was when the Hong Kong protest started, and the I don't want to, anyway, the thrust of the Hong Kong protest was that it was leaderless, it was it was amorphous, so anybody could do anything. Anybody who felt that, you know, there was something that needed to be done, they just went ahead and did it. There was no one leader. And I think also it's what the NSAS protest also kind of keyed into. So they took from that example of, you know what, if there's something that needs to be done, let's just mobilize and do them. And so I wanted to add to that I think that also to me is one of the successes of the movement of the NSAS protest, is the fact that there was not one single leader. I mean, there are pockets of people that you can identify, but I think it's a strategy that needs to, you know, go forward. Because I remember a lot of people were like, oh, like Benga mentioned, some people said, oh, there's so much disinformation out there. What can we do about it? If it was in the past, we might probably have gone to, you know, ask somebody who was leading the protest to say, oh, can you please come and do something about it? But people just came together and just said, let's do this. And they started doing things like, you know, raising money for food and all those things. So I think just to add and say that, you know, for lessons learned, that's the one thing that we can take away, that going forward, protest movements should be leaderless and amorphous, and just so that it keeps having a life of its own, keeps taking on a life of its own. Okay, so to answer your question about what kind of policies you think we should have, is it for us or is it for policymakers?
I think on every level, because not just from maybe the National Assembly or the state houses of assembly, but perhaps institutions can also have certain policies that, you know, can help in some way. But definitely, because it's an area of the government, this is a power that the government has to shut down the internet or ban people from using certain platforms. So I think largely it should be to keep our government in check from stopping us from using these platforms.
First of all, I don't think governments can ban us from using the internet, because internet is a fundamental right that we all own. Well, we recite it. It's like it's a fundamental right that we should all have. So government cannot ban us. So neither can government limit our freedom of expression to say, okay, you can't use social media, or neither can organizations say you can't use social media. There can be policies, there can be responsible use of social media, you know, and maybe to just talk a little about the social media law. There are already laws that address slander and libel. There's the Cyber Crime Act or Bill. I'm sure Benga can talk a bit more about that. That already prescribes punishment or ways to discipline people that contravene those laws, and that so a new social media bill or social media law is not going to add anything to what's already existing. If we want to actually regulate, social media is already regulated. So not creating a new is not the problem. It's the fact that the laws that we have are not even being properly enforced. Now, what can organizations do with themselves and policymakers? Like I said, internet is a fundamental right. There's also something called net neutrality, meaning that everybody has a right to be on the internet without being, well, this is just the layman explanation, without being at risk of being publicly identified, or just have a level of anonymity if they so choose. But so some of the things that we can think about in terms of policy are maybe better ways, but it's a slippery slope, personally. I don't think that social media should be regulated, or maybe just using social media responsibly. So, for instance, like Benga has mentioned, when you're spreading information, I hate misinformation. It's like when I go to sleep and I think about this information, it makes me go crazy, because it's just people. We need to be a bit more circumspect about how we share information in general, how we share information, how we share personal information. So things like, oh, we're in a protest, for instance, and you're sharing your location, you're sharing your things to identify you. I mean, it can be really nice in the heat of the moment, but those are things that can be used to, trace you, because ultimately you see all these things that we're using, all these tools that we're using, and we're saying yes, it's good for mobilizing. The bad actors, pro-government actors, also know about those tools and those technologies, and they use them as well. I mean, even things like petitions that we are now saying, oh, we can use petitions to galvanize people to action. We saw pro-government actors using petitions recently. So it means that, we have to be circumspect. I think also things like creating strategy for movements is not something that should be done publicly. Maybe we should look for more secure platforms. I wouldn't use a Twitter, for instance, to discuss strategy of any kind. I would probably use a Telegram, or even just, I don't know, maybe at the least WhatsApp. So having both internal policies and individual, if you like, rules about how you share information is one way that we can ensure that that there's some level of, I don't know, should we say democracy?
Okay, so I want to specify. I'm gonna move on to Benga, because I saw your thumb up on the comment about governments cannot stop us from using the internet. But the truth is, we've seen African governments literally shut down the internet. It has happened in multiple countries in Africa, and even the Internet Falsehoods Bill has aspects of it that talks about disallowing people from using certain platforms or shutting down the internet and such, which is something that is already in our National Assembly. So what are our steps as people who want to fight against this? Like, this is something that can happen to us. So what can we do in terms of policies? Do we need to push new policies to fight against this? Do we need to fight what's already existing to make sure it doesn't come to life? Because these people don't care about the Cyber Crimes Act. It's not enough for them. They want something that is, very hardcore, so that they can use it against, people who are using these platforms to speak up. So what can we do, Benga?
Okay. Thank you. So one of the things about bullies and governments with an agenda is that they model things up and try to confuse everyone. And I think it's important for us to distinguish between misinformation and deliberate with intent disinformation. Misinformation, it can happen to anyone. You can receive information you believe to be true and you can share it, or it can be satire, or it can be anything, and you share it, right? So somebody cracks a joke and says, oh my God, it be like say Buhari won't marry again. You see that, and you look at what looks like a picture for you to believe, and you share it. Now that's different. Disinformation itself, and the key difference between both is intent. With intent, which I'm sure is very important for lawyers on the call who are listening to this, is that there's an intent to actually deliberately mislead people. But when people talk about, let's regulate social media or let's control it, and they don't make a distinction between the two, then it tells you that, there is an agenda somewhere. So the reason why I gave a thumbs up to Chioma when she, said that the internet, governments cannot shut down the internet, it's not for the failure of, it's not that they won't attempt to do it. Paradigm Initiative that I work for does what is called the Digital Rights in Africa report. We've been doing this for about 5 years across African countries. Our 2019 report, focusing on 13 countries, shows exactly the same thing that has been happening since 2015. The way the internet is structured is such that there are circumvention opportunities for you that Because the internet, by the way, is a network of networks. That's why when Odun was speaking earlier, when she was talking about people downloading, certain apps, you can actually create a mesh network. So if 20 of us are in a room, we can download a software, an app on our phone that can create our own small internet. So this is the reason why I laugh when governments spend all their energy trying to shut down the internet, because what happens actually when governments shut down the internet is that they create a black market for the information they are trying to cover up. We've seen this happen in our 5 years of studies. Every time, I mean, look at Uganda. Uganda shut down the internet, and the results of elections that nobody was paying attention to in the first place then became viral. So the problem is when you do that, what you then do is you now create attention, because not only are there circumvention tools, it's also the fact that some networks in certain countries are such that there is no kill switch. The famous kill switch of Egypt from 2010, 2011 that everybody talked about was easy because they had a certain structure to their network. We don't have that structure to our network, and that, by the way, speaks to the incompetence of government in the past. So it is not for the failure of attempts for government to try to shut down, which is the reason why organizations like ours and many others, when we see an African country begin to approach elections or certain things that we know trigger shutdowns, we provide information for them in terms of downloading VPNs, because there are many levels of shutdowns. There's restrictions, which is basically you don't allow people to go to some websites. If that's the case, you can easily use a VPN. If you use a VPN, it means you can change where it looks like you're accessing the internet from. You can change to the Bahamas for all you care. And because the information is restricted for Nigeria, you can still have access to it. There's throttling, which is basically about slowing down the speed of the internet. Nigerians may not know the difference between throttling and our daily experience, unfortunately, because your networks your networks don't work well anyway. So if the government deliberately throttles, we'll just laugh at them, because we're used to plug and pray. You send a message and you pray that it goes. So Mr. Buhari and Oshimbajo, don't bother wasting our money on that. We won't know the difference. But when it comes to finally shutting down is a waste of money, is a waste of resources. Cameroon has done it, Gabon has done it, Guinea has done it, Ethiopia has done it, Uganda has done it. All of them that have done it, ask them, did they stop people from speaking? No, it is a waste of money. They lost money. And coming back finally to your question in terms of policies that we need, Nigeria does not need any extra laws to punish people. If we need anything, we actually need laws to assert our rights on the internet. And we were making progress towards that, by the way. In 2019, May, the Digital Rights and Freedom Bill got to the president's table. By the way, that Digital and Freedom Bill, I'm sure the reason why it wasn't signed, part of it was because they saw the word rights and they thought it was all about rights. It was also about responsibilities. It actually talks about what needs to be done about disinformation and about dangerous speech, how judicial oversight must exist. Because the problem with countries like Nigeria is not even the proposals of the laws. It is the fact that we know for a fact, based on the context, the laws will be abused. When Chairman mentioned the cybercrime law, Paradigm Initiative, Enough is Enough Nigeria, and Media Rights Agenda are still in court. We're now waiting for the Supreme Court to give us a date for the final hearing on our lawsuit against the government on the cybercrime law of 2015. Why is it that governors and people high up that have used this same internet platform? By the way, the biggest purveyor, the biggest sharer, the biggest source of false news or fake news in Nigeria is the government itself. And the same thing for hate speech. When political actors, you heard the governor of my home state, Ondo State, without shame, say on TV that those are gunshot statements, or what did they call it? That when politicians lie or when politicians say things that are not true and that could lead their followers to even kill people, that it is nothing because they know that they don't believe themselves. Anyway, we don't need new laws. There are more than enough laws that exist to punish people. What we need are laws that can help us seek redress when our rights are violated.
All right, thank you so much. I heard that Rotimi is now online with us, so I just wanted to take a question actually from the viewers and give to Rotimi if you can hear me. So there's a question here, and though it's not related to technology, I want us to see how we can link it to technology. Sorry, I'm going a bit quick because our time is almost up for this panel, and I really want us to stick to time. So the question is, how can our votes count? Because they make elections scary by sending thugs to disrupt election, shooting guns, and thereby making many afraid of coming out to vote. So this question is from Udubrafore Otubure. And I would like Rotimi to take it and how we can use technology count. So that's the question. Is Rotimi online? Okay, so I'm not quite sure. Okay, anybody can take the question. If you guys want to take the question, if you want me to read it again, I'll just read it again. Anybody can take the question because I'm not hearing from Binga, because I want us to take a message from our viewers. A question. The question is, how can our votes count? Because they make elections scary by sending thugs to disrupt the election, shooting guns, and thereby making many afraid of coming out to vote. So in terms of technology, what can we do during elections to make it easier for our votes to count at that time?
Electronic voting, if Nigeria ever adopts it, really. It's one of the easiest ways to make sure that people are not, thumbprinting on ballots or all of those things. There's definitely more tech advanced and tech enabled ways to make sure and that people are voting and their votes are counted. But as long as it continues to be manual, there's always the risk of each vote not counting.
Okay, that's
I think also,
okay.
this one.
I think Chama, you were going to say something?
Okay, no, I thought you were rounding up. I think also beyond technology, um, even just showing up to vote. I understand that there is that fear of violence. The fear of violence sometimes keeps people at home, even when there is no violence. So I've voted in every election since 1999, and the thing is always that there's always a much poorer turnout of young people versus older people, or versus the people you call thugs, because they have a motivation to be there. They've been mobilized either by receiving some kind of stomach infrastructure. So they come there. But we young people like us, okay, I'm not so young anymore, but young people will not show up. They'll be like, they will not count, even when you're even so. For me, I think it's mobilizing. People who have using technology to mobilize people to even show up in the first place. If there are 100 people and 10 area boys show up, I'm not sure how. I mean, of course, they might have weapons and everything, but if they'll be deterred. But if you're not there, then it's easy for them to come there and hijack the elections. So for me, using technology to make our votes count is using technology to mobilize as many people as possible to actually show up. Because as far as we know now, we don't have electronic voting. We don't have votes by mail. So working with what we currently have, we have to show up to vote, essentially.
Okay, thank you very much for that really important point about showing up to vote. And I have a comment here from Asma'u, and she says the issue with electronic voting is it's a big luxury in Nigeria. And I just want to link that to what actually was meant to be my final question. And I hope that Binga can take this question. Sorry, just 1 second. Okay, so she talks about how electronic voting is a luxury, but also the reality is that in Nigeria, having access to internet is a bit of a luxury for many people. Our internet penetration is about 46%, with projections showing that the figure might rise to about 65% in the next 5 years. So that's a considerable gap, and we need to see how we can, try to recruit and ensure active participation of people that are offline, to join some of the movements that are being pushed online. So how can we do that?
So if we were trying to convince people who were living in a different environment, we would have needed to translate the kind of conversations we're having. But I think what we need to realize is that the things that we complain about are already felt by people. They are already speaking up, maybe not the same way we're speaking. They're not tweeting. They may even, be so hand to mouth that it can't give time out to go and protest. But one of the things I've said over time is that when Nigerians are ready, and we saw a bit of it during this NSAS protest, we will stop outsourcing and waiting for someone to educate us on what we need to do. We will go ahead and express ourselves. But having said that, it is important for us to begin to have those conversations beyond our silos. Many of us have spheres of influence. It's not, we're discussing 2010 to date in terms of protests and how technology has been used. We've moved from the time when, and I can never forget how we, live streamed the Enough is Enough Nigeria protest. We had to literally put a laptop on the back of a truck, connect to a generator because the only available mobile internet service needed to be plugged into a power source. And as the car was moving, people behind it, it was being broadcast and it was considered to be a big deal. At the point, of course, at that time, there wasn't a camera that could face you and things like that. Moving from then to now, a few things have changed. Government attitude and response to protests, haven't changed. But I think we've learned at least 3 key lessons. Number one is the fact that we can translate our anger into something visible, either through speaking online, either through, also through sharing with people on various platforms, on radio with the people around us, because it belongs to us, the responsibility of being able to break down some of these issues. One of the most visible things you would have noticed maybe during the Occupy Nigeria protest, for example, was when someone explained that the presidency gets 1 million naira for breakfast, 1 million naira for lunch, 1 million naira for dinner. So this is one thing that we can do. We can translate many of those high-level policy things into what people can understand in their own language. That's number one. Number two is that we must never allow an intimidation, the type that we're facing right now by governments. Many of these guys are cowards. The reason they're acting the way they are doing right now is because they're shitting in their pants. They are scared. Please speak up. Yes, if you are concerned, you don't want to be, you think, oh, you have concerns and all that, use the power of anonymity. We're not asking you to say false things, but speak up. But I think the last but not the least important thing is for us to weave efforts together. There's a tendency, there is one thing that is common to anyone who is either a leader or a major person in protest. We all have certain levels of belief in the power that we have, but I think it's important for us to weave all these baskets of efforts together so that those who understand policy can work with us on the policy front. Those who understand issues on the streets can work with us on the streets. I'm sure some of us saw the video of the gentleman who, spoke with alayes and in a language they could understand. We also understand it because it was using our platform. So I think these 3 things are important as we go ahead. It's only a fool who doesn't learn from history. We must learn from history. There are many lessons that stand out and we can embrace these lessons. And of course, finally realize that this is a long-term journey. It's not going to end tomorrow. It's not going to end in 2 years. This is a long-term journey.
Okay, thank you. You actually answered the question that I was just about to ask across the whole panel. And the question is from John Aminu Jacob, which is, where do we go from here? And I think you've given us solid next steps, but I would also like to hear from the other panelists, Odinayo and Chioma. Where do we go from here, and what are, the next steps that we take?
For me, it's I'm very new to this. I've never, like, before this, hadn't taken an interest in movements or things around that. And so this was very eye-opening. This was an education, a baptism by fire, so to speak. And one of the like key lessons I took from it is that, well, you cannot look back, you can only look forward. And that means that understanding that young people in Nigeria are starting to find their voice. That can only get better. It's a positive thing. And so, this period that we're in is very charged, and a lot of lessons are still going to come out of it. But the most important thing is that we have a voice and we can actually make change. So how to look forward and begin to like channel that voice into actionable change and actionable work is something that I've still started to think about. But most importantly, a good place to start would be participating in any and all by-elections that are coming up. INEC is starting registration in January 2021. Uh, get your PVC ready so that you can start the process of getting your voice heard. And like Choma said, show up, right? Show up to vote. I think that's really important. Whether it counts or not is a whole different conversation, but you need to first perform the civic duty, and I think that's a great place to start.
All right, thank you. Shoma, please.
Yeah, mine would be to for us to realize, for young Nigerians to realize that we're not existing in isolation. So generally, globally, there's a level of dissent and dissatisfaction, especially for 2020. That has been, 2020 has been worsened by the pandemic and the poor economic situation. So you will see that there have been so many protests and all over the world. It means that what we should be doing is to be looking at some of these movements around the world, see the lessons that we can learn, see the tools that they use that we can adapt to our current situation. Because, like I said, we're not existing in isolation. Can you?
I could hear you, but then I think we got a little internet issue.
Hello.
Yes, we could. I think
yes,
we are.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay, so I was saying that, so we need to realize that we don't exist in isolation and to learn from learn lessons from all the other movements around the globe. Take away, use tools that they use that have been successful there, and to just add it also and adapt it to our local context. And I think that's one way that that's one other thing that we can do going forward.
I'd like to weigh in on this last question if I have some time.
Is that Rotimi?
Yes.
Okay, yes, please do.
All right. Thank you very much, and apologies for joining quite late. I had some internet difficulties. My final point about where do we go from here is also saying that we need to make deliberate efforts to connect the different silos. I was in Ekiti when the NSAS protest was raging on, and I met with two different groups of young people. One, there was this educated, connected groups of young people who were leading the protest. In one of the evenings, we were dealing with an emergency. We ran into the hoodlums who have blocked the road. We were forced to have conversations with them. And I was surprised that there were quite a number of graduates among them, because they told us we're educated, we don't have a job. And we had quite very interesting conversations. These guys are not on social media, but we need to make deliberate effort to connect with the different silos, especially those who don't exist in the urban cities across Nigeria, and make that deliberate effort to connect with them and build people participation, especially towards the next elections, and also more active citizen participation as we go along in Nigeria. That is very important. The previous question I was talking about technology in elections, I think at the end of the day, whatever technology platform that we use for elections will be manned by humans. And as much as humans who man physical elections are the same ones who would man tech-based elections, then we might not see different outcomes. Overall, there are less than 10% or 15% of voting centers where there are violence in Nigeria. And like Chioma said, we need to encourage more people to go out and vote. And in voting centers where we have polling units, where we have more people come out with their mobile phones, take pictures, have evidence, the less we would have of options for people to manipulate elections. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I think I want to thank you all, Benga, Ordinary, Choma, and Rotimi, for sharing your comments. And these comments have really been enriching for me, and I'm sure everybody else who has been listening in. Um, I have one question, but I want to read it as a comment before we round up this session, because I think it's a really solid point that maybe we can, use as food for thought, because it's important to also discuss this, bringing in a different angle. So the question is from anonymous attendee, and it says, how do you see a generational conflict playing out in the debate on social media and internet in Nigeria? If yes or no, what do you think this means for the prospects of change and the space of action in Nigeria? Young Nigerians are educating themselves online and learn new perspectives on governance and society. This seems to scare the people in power. On some, young people do not necessarily address their elders as excellency, but ask a critical question in the north of the malams and imams who cannot keep up with some, and they're losing power and influence over young people. I think the reason I'm reading this, though it has a lot of random points coming up, but I think, yes, there is a question of an intergenerational issue, because I feel a lot of people in government or older leaders tend to look at social media as just a place where youth are playing, but we can see how really powerful it is. And I think that's one of the main reasons it's becoming a problem, that people want to create policies and regulate over it. So using technology going forward, I think this discussion has brought out many points on how technology has added in the history of movements over the last decade in Nigeria, and going forward, what also we can use technology for, and what aspects we can, of the issues that we face, we can use technology to address as well. So thank you everybody for joining this session, and thanks for having me here as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Miriam, for being a wonderful hostess or host.
Thank you, Miriam. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nana, are you around?
Hello, everyone. My name is Peter. I am the Senior Programs Officer at TechR. We would like to say thank you very much to every single one of our panelists. This was an incredibly enlightening panel. Just a few takeaways, specifically the conversations about where to go next. I'm grateful that they brought up points about how we need to talk about connecting silos so that we don't just sit down in our ivory towers, assuming that the change will occur where we are. So I think that's a huge lesson for everyone, ensuring that we can connect these lessons we've learned in not just movement building, but also pushing the use of technology and deploying these types of technology, especially at the grassroots level. We'll be moving to the next session in a bit. The next panel is actually going to chronicle and look at central roles that women have played in movement building as well as protests from 2010 up to this point. We have incredible panelists, just as incredible as the first panel was. So just if everyone could just, catch a breath a little bit, we'll be back in about 2 or 3 minutes. Thank you very much, everyone. Hey everyone, apologies for that short break. We're back online and we'll just go straight into the second panel. It's going to be hosted by Indy Kato. And on the panel, we have three great speakers. We're having Aisha Yusufu with us today. We're also having Yemi Ademolekun, as well as Cynthia Mbabalu. So I'll just leave you in the safe hands of Indy Kato as she takes over the second panel. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
We can.
Okay. All right. Welcome to our own panel. And this panel, of course, has the gender angle to it. And on this panel, we actually have very great women here. It's not one of those we are kicking you to, go and stay and talk about gender while important things are happening. It's actually the center of this important conversation. And for me, it's very important because we have been pushing severally for women inclusion on several grounds in politics, governance, business, whichever way you look at it, Nigerian women are lagging, and not for the lack of experience or lack of ability to actually perform and do these things. But it's I would chalk it up to the love for free labor for women. But this is not my I'm a moderator here, I would say. So we'll listen to our great panelists break this down. Now, this protest, for me, very key things. It was a leaderless movement, but in that leaderless movement were women actually performing very prominent roles. And if I can draw a straight line to the success of this, I would look at it as the organizing of women, that level of organization. And there was a joke we actually played. A lot of young women were playing this joke. I even partook in that prior to the kickoff of the protest. At first people had started complaining about SARS brutality, and there was this bitterness or this anger or concern that when women speak about their own issues, we don't get the same level of concern. And so some jokes were made, and like it was almost as if it was prophetic. There was a pointer to, if women join this thing now, and if you know how, because the level at which women organize on so many levels, if women actually join this thing, what would happen? And then a couple of days later, it started happening. Now, we're going to try to trace back to women's participation in movement and how women have helped movement succeed. Would have loved to go back to as far as the struggle for independence for Nigeria and how a lot of those women who actually partook in this had their history almost erased or had their parts in history almost erased. But to save time, we will start from 2011 2020, which has been a very key period in Nigeria's history, especially with respect to citizens-led movement. So our panel is titled How Women Have Led Movements from 2011 to 2020. And on this panel, I have three great women, really, really great women. Yemi Adamelo, okay, Adamolekun from Enough is Enough, Nigeria. And Yemi, of course, has been very, very prominent in the civic space in Nigeria, parts of movements, leading movements, sunk her entire life into this. And Aisha Yasufu is, she's clapping for herself. Aisha Yasufu is, at best, she would like to say she's a concerned citizen and really just stay around that citizen making noise tag. But Aisha is a foremost and really, really great activist in Nigeria, and her voice can be heard on critical issues, irrespective of whose ox is God, including mine. Let's move to Cynthia Mbamalu. Cynthia Mbamalu of Yaga Africa. Cynthia is a young woman I've known in this space who's really, really great at organizing, whose voice has been key in Nigeria in terms of legislative action, policy making, and generally moving the nation forward. So these three great women are going to touch on this topic. So straight up to the first question. and it will be for Cynthia. Cynthia and Bamalu, are you there? Is
Yes,
Cynthia?
yes,
Hi.
I am.
This
Hi.
question is for you because of,
Can
I mean, you would
I
be
turn
the.
off my video? I really have poor internet today, so I'll just turn off for a while.
Okay. So this is, Cynthia, this is for you. What was your first introduction to women's leadership in movements?
Thank you so much. I'm Indicator, and really an honor to be on this panel with great women. And I think when you started introduction, I was let's trace back the role of women back to 2011. In my mind, I'm like, well, for every movement in the world, women have been a major denominator, that there was no movement that succeeded without the role, without women's participation. So for me, for each time I've learned or heard about movement, I've always at least identified one or two women who were active in that process. So if we're looking at movements in Nigeria from 2011 downwards, I would just look at very important movement to me. And I think Bring Back Our Girls is one dear to me, because Bring Back Our Girls was fighting and demanding for a government that had literally ignored the insecurity and the threat to lives of young women, young girls, students that were abducted, and we are focusing on politics rather than fighting for women, fighting for, to get the girls back. But Bring Back Our Girls was beyond just the young girls that were abducted, because it was also about the threats women were facing with the growing rate of insecurity and the fact that the government was not taking it as a very serious national issue. So for me, that is one. And that is because we saw women leading the movement, demanding. I know the first protest, I remember I was out on the street, it rained that day, and I saw large number of women intergenerational leadership, both is it as far as you're going back to the older generation, be it Auntie Obi Ezekwesili, or coming down to even the younger generation. You see, I saw women in the street. It was raining. There was no going back. But what was important about Bring Back Our Girls was is the lessons I believe for women involvement in movement is the fact that when women are part of the movement, they remain on the issue. And for me, is the important role women play as the life wire of movement. So Bring Back Our Girls continued, and from a Nigerian movement, it got global and international attention. So that is one for me, the Bring Back Our Girls, and the fact that young women stood up and literally spoke truth to power and said to the government, you cannot continue to act with so much impunity when our girls have been abducted and are living in different unimaginable conditions, and you're not doing anything about that. And we want to see that stop. And women were there every day. They mobilized in different cities in the country, and they continued to keep to go out on the streets to keep the message alive. The other for me, I think it's also, I'll bring it to, well, the NSAS, because NSAS is the most common, but NSAS did not begin just this year. It's been ongoing, but look at the beauty of mobilizing that happened in October and the role women played. And I think it's always, whenever they say NSAS was leaderless, to me it wasn't, in the sense that I think over a period of time, we equate leadership with individuals. So we don't see leadership as people taking responsibility to achieve purpose. See leadership as one man or one woman standing up somewhere. But what we saw in NSAS were young people taking leadership across board. And now let us talk about the beautiful flavor women introduced to the NSAS movement. And you look at the fact that we had young women at different levels who were both grassroots mobilizers and grassroots organizers. We had women who saw a need and met that need. And that is the second important role for me, women play in movement, beyond just being the life wise. The fact that I think over a period of time we ignore this, but women actually are the think and do powerhouse of movement. Because we sit down as women by our natural configuration, we say, what are the needs? And we meet those needs. So look at the legal services that were provided. Look at the mobilization for funds, the role the feminist the feminist group played. Look at the simple intentionality in ensuring we were pushing out information and had evidence to show the cruelty meted out to citizens. So for instance, the DJ Switch video, live stream. That is one key evidence that would always hold on to showcase how the military meted out violence on citizens. So that's important thing and do. I think for me, women in movement, it's not just about we want to be seen or we want to show our faces. It's also about we sit within movements and we ask what is the need that needs to be filled, and we act immediately. So that's an important role I've seen women play. And I'll connect it also with Not Too Young to Run, because I have women here who are also part of the movement. And you may not know what happens behind the scene, but within that movement, when it came to issues of can we push out content to stay on the message, were women within the movement who were drafting the messages, putting that content to go out. There were women within the movement who were those going out to get people to the streets, who were working late into the night to put together the placards. So that is that important. Like I said, they serve as that think and do powerhouse. We sit and identify what is the challenge and how can we fix that challenge. Now, women are known to be passionate about whatever they do. So when women lead, they remain, it's not about, oh, the government said this. For women, is if we care about this issue, we remain true to that issue. So if we have people talk about Aisha Yusuf, for instance, you see, when people are passionate about issues, especially women, they don't care who is the stumbling block. For them, this is the issue we want to push together, push forward, and we stand and we remain strict and we remain on those messages and we focus on that issue. And sorry, Indicator, I was just wanting to throw this one because, like I said, it's not just about 2011. If you take it back to the pro-democracy movement, women, Nigerian women, were major life wire that kept those movements alive. Take it to the independence movement. Women were, sadly, most times, names were not, women's names were failed to be mentioned, but thankfully in our generation, as technology grows, we're beginning to tell the stories of women who are most times unseen heroes or shadow heroes, but they are the main people who are making the move and doing the work. And lastly, the Montgomery bus boycott in the US that we talk about, Rosa Parks, that led to the civil rights and the change in civil rights law, that brought about civil rights law rather, mobilization were done by women. Rosa Parks, the day she said, I want to fight this, women groups stayed up all night to write letters. Now, no one tells us, so most time we talk about Martin Luther King. Yes, he's a hero, but women were the ones who were up all night drafting letters, telling people, hey, we're going to boycott the buses. We're going to work, we're going to march until these laws are changed. So like I said, it's beyond just now. It's women have played a very critical role and they remain life wire of every movement. If you want the movement to succeed, get women to be part of it, let women lead. Because when women pick an issue, they remain steadfast and they push for that issue until they see change.
Thank you, Cynthia. You have actually answered at least 3 of my questions in this one. Thank you so much for these points made. Yes, you can point out to when women actually decide to face an issue, you will see things change. Really grateful for the examples you, and this is what brings us to the question on the next question, and this is for Aisha. Aisha Yusufu, are you there? Aisha, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Aisha, Cynthia made reference to the Bring Back Our Girls movement, which for me is a very, very huge point. I remember as a much younger person, a very silly, much younger person, seeing the Bring Back Our Girls movement. It's like, what is this? And one key thing I remember then, even though at that point, I did not even care, and I would say that at that point, I didn't care. I didn't know what it was that was happening, I would say. But I know somebody came out complaining that they went there and OBS Equesley was very strict about that. Can you imagine? She was not letting people just come in and say they wanted to do. She would say, where are the people that started this? But as time went on, you would notice that OBS Equesley's methods were very important in starting that. And I know in conversations with, in sustaining that, and I know in conversations with you, Aisha, as I'm going to ask this question, I'm going to call it out. You also have a way of saying, oh, gender is not an issue and all of that, but this panel is very keen on gender. And I'm going to ask that with respect to Bring Back Our Girls and not putting down the work of many young men in that, because I remember how steadfast Morocco and others have been. But how has that experience, especially that sisterhood, and I've experienced that sisterhood, Aisha, so I'll call it, especially that sisterhood, led to a great example for further movements in Nigeria. But I won't stop there. This is one angle to the question. And with respect to that, bringing it to the NSAS movement, was the prominence of women in the NSAS protest what kept it decentralized? and leaderless? Is this also what enabled women to participate and organize as much as they did? Is this what kept things on track? To explain this question, or do you understand, or do I break it down even further?
No, I'm good with the way you've put it. So thank you so much, Indikato. And for me, I think it's very key. And I will say this specifically from my own personal perspective. The NSAS movement went as far as it did because of the participation of the feminist coalition. No two ways about it. And the women coming together to work on that, ensure there was strategy, ensure there was organization, it ensured they were able to take care of their logistics, their welfare, they provided security when the state refused to give the NSAS protesters security. They were able to deal with healthcare issues. There were hospitals that were refusing to take on those who had injuries and all of that, the NSAS protesters. So they did amazingly well. And of course, like you did rightly say, India, at the beginning, there were jokes around where people were saying, oh, let women take over this protest. That's when you see it happen. I remember there was a tweet that generated so much conversation where one of them said, oh, let women be the ones to lead this protest and do it. And then you find out that there will be solution. You know, a lot of women were angry, and rightly so. And just like, oh, it's when it comes to taking the fight and taking the bullets, you want the women to be there. And then when it comes to issue of leadership, you suddenly remember that women are not supposed to be in offices of leadership according to Nigerian theory. And so it's very important, going back to the Bring Back Our Girls movement and looking at the leadership, the structure, it was a women's led movement, and it still is a women led movement, and that helped a lot. In as much as whatever you're doing in a particular movement, there have to be structures. And one of the things that the Bring Back Our Girls movement did was to ensure there was structure. We had our core values, which a lot of people felt, oh, what's the need for this core value and everything? For example, the very first time we went to see the president in 2014, we tried to go there. We were stopped by the police, and a lot of people felt that we had the numbers to outpower the police and, you know, just go brutal and everything. And I remember Dr. Obieza Kwesili standing and said, no, let's sit down. We're going to do this based on the level of non-violence, violent engagement. And there were a lot of people who actually left the movement because of that. And even when the issue of collecting funds came up, I'm a businesswoman. And for me, I felt, oh, initially when we're having those conversations, that we needed to, as a movement, we needed let Nigerians donate. And if I was also in the resource team, and we were talking about let Nigerians bring money together that we will use and everything. And one of those people that said no to the issue of collecting funds was actually Dr. Obieza Kwesili. And then, you know, she was the chairperson of the strategic team before Aina took over from her. And initially we're like, oh, okay, how are we going to get the money to do all the things that we're doing? But I tell you, almost 7 years later, I'm so glad that she put her foot down on that, because at the end of the day, we were able to focus on the reason why we were there in the first place, rather than focusing on issues of how much money we're going to get and how to get the money done and the work that we'll be able to do. And people were able to contribute their own time, their empathy, stay on doing things, just knowing fully well that we were the ones who had our money where our empathy was. So for me, having women in terms of leading protests, it's very, very important. And I will tell you this, the first time that an NSAS protest was organized was actually mainly by men. And that was either 2017 or 2018, but I think it's more of 2018. That protest was called for, and they all met at the Unity Fountain. And I can't even remember whether there was any female there. I knew I was the only one who spoke, the only female, I think, who spoke at that event. And on that day, we also had the Bring Back Our Girls movement that we needed. We're going to march to the villa, and they were also going to march. But guess what happened? There were a lot of, the police had pro-SARS protesters. And I tell you, there were thousands and thousands and thousands of them. I've never seen that number of people at a protest in Nigeria before. The line was endless. They were working. And somehow the protest was now, they were supposed to march to the villa. They ended up not doing it because we had marched ahead. And so sometimes that's the kind of resilience that women bring in. Probably if they had more women, and I'm sure from my own personal opinion, if they had women on that, they would have been able to go on. There's something about leadership. I think women are born leaders, and we're able to strategize and multitask. And maybe because of the upbringing we have, I don't know whether it's the gender or the kind of roles and conditioning that we're supposed to do. Even as children, we're supposed to take leadership roles as children. Looking at the Nigerian system, as a girl, even your senior brother, you were told as a little girl that you were supposed to be more responsible and take on more responsibility than your siblings who are male, even when they are older than you. And so sort of that leadership kind of helps, because you have multitasking, you have issue of staying on issues and going on with it. And so that particular protest never worked. And I think over the years, I've seen there hasn't been any call for NSAS protest until October, when it happened. And you saw, like you did say, there was banter on Twitter when they would say if women would join in. And indeed, we saw what happened when women joined in. And let me say something categorically, from the Aba women protest to the one in Abeokuta and everything, women have always led all the major protests that have led to serious change in Nigeria and the world beyond. But the only thing that has happened is the fact that when it comes to leadership, everyone suddenly remembers that women are not supposed to be in leadership position, like I said earlier, and they do that. And that's the reason why we have a nation that has failed, and it's not carrying people the way that it should. We don't have good governance, we don't have development, we don't have accountability, we don't have transparency. It's simply because we don't have the 50% of our population in office. We don't have women there, we have only men. In terms of sacrifice, in terms of empathy, in terms of service, when you're looking for those kind of leadership, check who are the people in place. It's always women. Go to schools where you have PTAs, where the leadership are based on service, where the leadership is based on sacrifice, it's women mostly that are in those leadership positions. And guess when the leadership becomes male dominated? When there is something to be gotten out of it, when there's money involved, when there's something coming in. If today the Nigerian political space and leadership role suddenly have a situation whereby it's going to be more about service and hardly people won't get anything. If, for example, today the National Assembly are going to be receiving minimum wage as their payment, I tell you that 70 to 80% of the posts will be filled up by women, because with their normal head kind of thing, they are the ones that will do the work, do the sacrifice and everything. And for example, in the tattoo, for me, I'm going to go a bit personal now. I see the kind of head work you carry to work for your people, to be there for them, to keep doing things, and people are calling you left, right, and center. But guess what happens when it comes to political position? They begin to tell you all sorts of things, why you are this, or your gender, you're this, you're that. It is time that we begin to call this bluff out and call them out. You cannot be the one carrying the problem of people when they have issues, when they need money to feed, when they have been displaced from their houses and all of that. They remember that there's an indicator. They do not remember that you were born woman and you're still a woman. But when it is time to go into leadership position, they suddenly remember that, oh no, wait a while and all of this. Election is over. 2019, for me, I was shocked when you didn't even get the ticket to your party. I remember telling you, I was extremely shocked. But then you're there, you carried their wahala before that, you're carrying their wahala after that. It's time to begin to do tough love. There are no two ways about it. And women, that issue of being soft in a way of, how do I put it? That empathy, we must begin to regulate it and let people know that if you are not going to be there, I'm not going to be the one to carry your slack and your wahala when you bring in people who are going to be in leadership position, and they cause more problem for others to go and carry. When they need people that will bring food for them, when they have been displaced from their houses, who are the people who are in those spaces? They are mostly women carrying all the stress and wahala and everything on their head. But when it comes to leadership position, they're suddenly being pushed away. And by the way, Indy, you know me, I'm going to be very hard on you, because I see you in the future, very close future, to be in a leadership position. We will do, sister, when we are at home. But when we are outside, I will hold you accountable. And I'll hold you more worse, because I believe more in you than a whole lot of other people that are out there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aisha. I experience the being hard on me every single day. If I go a step out of line in public, she will drag me. That one is no. So well done, Aisha. And everything, every point, of course, has been true. As a personal example that she gave, when it was time for me to run for office, the first thing I was reminded of was my gender. At every point where I was speaking and putting my life on the line, there was no talk of that. I remember clearly my people told me that, oh, they know that if I was a man, they would have said Southern Kaduna had found leadership. But as I am a woman, that a Yoruba man will come and marry me and I will owe my allegiance to them. I always find that funny and why they specified Yoruba. So, Yemi, Yemi, are you there?
I am. Good afternoon.
Hi.
How are you?
Hi, Yemi. Good afternoon. Yemi, I will start by speaking to how much you have put into this and how easy and seamless you make it look. Every day I see you, I remember, I think I'll chalk it up to you and Aisha Yesufu making me tone down. And it wasn't that it was a thing that I thought that I was too much, but it was putting things into perspective for me. Every time I'll see Yemi, even if Yemi is going to Aso Rock, he would have on the most simple attire. It's like, how does Yemi want to wake up and be most functional today to get things done? And that's like, you see how you know that it's just, I'm waking up, I'm going to be neat and presentable, but this is not going to be the thing at the front of my head on what to wear. And it was a thing for me, like it meant so much to me. It helped me prioritize. Every time I'll see Aisha with the full hijab, because we have these conversations, and I know that beneath that, Aisha has her days of fashion and all of that. But it's that uniform, it was just, how do you strip every complicated thing and focus? And that focus, I mean, for me, I know from 10 years, from enough is enough, 2010. You know what I was doing in 2010? I know from 10 years, but you have been here. You have been consistent. It's whichever issue at the point, whoever is there at that time, Yemi is on the battle at that time. And we've gone from one president to another president to another president to us being Yemi, na Yeye person. This thing Yemi is doing too. Oh, I really agree with Yemi. And in the future, we don't know, oh, Yemi has started again because we prefer somebody else. But it's the consistency. And I don't know if you have ever sat and thought about yourself as like, wow, I, Yemi, woman in this space doing this. I don't know. I don't know what box or what to say because you show up seamlessly. And it is that as a woman, as the kind of person you are, I mean, what is it about us? What is it about women like you that, when it's time to organize at such levels and people know the big moments? Yemi, are you there? Is Yemi
Yes,
there?
I am.
Okay.
I am.
People know the big moments, right? I will speak to that. People know the big moments. They know when enough is big. They know when not too young to run is big. They know when answers is big. But it's every day. And what is it about you, about women like you, about women to keep up this consistency, to organize on these levels? And how does this speak on the need for improved participation for women across board in Nigeria? Basically, how you have shown up, how other women like you have shown up, and how does this speak for the need for improved participation for women in politics, governance, policy making, everything across board?
Thank you, Indy. Sorry, I had to switch off my video for a bit. Wow. To be honest, I think a big part of my journey is a function of my parents. So both parents were academics. I grew up on a university campus. Oh, thank you, Chioma, for having me on Tech platform. Hello to Cynthia and Aisha and the panel before. Really glad to be able to share on this platform. So both parents were academics. My father was a student activist when he was a student at the University of Ibadan. And my mom just was a rock star. I grew up seeing a mother who was extremely compassionate, would give of herself. I think, who was speaking? I think it was Cynthia when she was speaking that was talking about if there's a role that requires sacrifice and service, you will find women there. And my mom was truly the definition of that, bending over backwards 10 times over for people. And I guess maybe partly also her training. She was a trained nurse, a trained psychologist, had a PhD in guidance and counseling. So that was her line of work, if I want to do that. And I saw her demonstrate it over and over again. She died almost 2 decades ago, but it was after her death that I realized just how many of my friends spoke to her because they couldn't speak to their parents. So I say all of that to say that I'm a product of my parents, but I've never seen myself as doing things because in a gendered lens. I just do. I'm just who I am, and I'm passionate about what I'm passionate about. But I don't think of myself as a woman. I will do this. But what I do know is that people put that in my face a lot, because also of the way, as Indy said, of the way I dress. I'm not big for hair. My hair has refused to grow, so I don't stress about it. I cut it. Let's keep it moving. In terms of what I wear as well, I think the less stress in my life, the better. So deliberate, I'm very deliberate about that. Very deliberate about wearing jeans and t-shirts because it's just easy. So because also in my carriage, I'm not feminine in the way people describe being feminine. It comes up a lot in how people relate to me. I mean, for many years, and even till today, I mean, I've led EIE now as ED for 9 years, but there's still people who default to just assume that the ED of EIE is a guy. So when they see me or when they hear me, it still happens still in 2020. Oh, I thought the ED of EIE was a man. Still happens. So I guess in that context, I've never seen myself in that light, but I've become a lot more conscious of the role that women have played in movements in Nigeria. And I think one of the disadvantages of that is, or one of the disadvantages, not of the role they played, rather, of a lack of documentation, is that we don't get enough of those stories. They're not documented for like history, for lesson, for people to know. Cynthia was talking about the different roles that women have played during different movements from, I think it was Aisha, Abba Women's Riots, Egba Women's Riots. So they're the ones that are only women and market. And it's clear that it's women. So it's not that they are doing something in the back or whatever it is. They're the ones leading it. But then in a lot of other movements, independence movement, even June 12, I mean, let's look at June 12, for example. I was speaking to someone on the back of this NSAS movement who's writing an academic piece, and she was talking about the role that women played in June 12, about how a lot more of them played roles, but they're not written in history books because they're behind the scenes. And their stories are not told. They themselves don't tell their stories. And then in the grand scheme of it, you start with the people that you see, so their stories are not told. So beyond your Joe Dumakins, your Kudirat Abiolas, your IOBs of CLO, that whole June 12 Abacha movement, there are a lot more women who played roles that they're not documented and that we don't know. Fast forward to even EIE 10 years, there wasn't, at least as far as I know, there wasn't a very sense of anything gendered in what was happening. Things happened, there was women there, and it happened, but not in the sense that Bring Back Our Girls, Occupy, same thing, but not in the sense that Bring Back Our Girls and NSAS have been. And I think Aisha, Bring Back Our Girls, not only was it a call because there were young students that were missing, young female students, it's a girls' school, young female students, but the people who called for the protest were women, and it ended up being women-led. So in all the cities where there was a core group, from Abuja to Lagos, New York and DC, all women-led and all women driving that conversation. And then NSAS, as Aisha said, the role that the Feminist Coalition played in just providing a backbone in terms of the support that it provided also gave it very much that face. So yeah, I think to your question, I don't see myself in that lens. I'm now more aware of the role that women play in movements, but never been a framing for me as a person.
Okay, thank you so much, Yemi. And okay, so I want to go to the next question. Cynthia, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, hi, Cynthia. Cynthia, you've been working around elections, and of course, 2023, everybody's projecting to 2023, or that's the next step, that's the next place. I haven't gone through the baptism of fire of politics. I'm like, is that where we want to get another heartbreak? You know, that's how I feel. And Cynthia, you know this, working in elections, how that would usually pan out, and you know how stressful that situation can be. But we work regardless, right? So in terms of 2023, what are steps? Because people haven't actually, this is now that people are actually paying attention to the political space. And I know we've had several conversations about what we want for women going forward. Now, just a reminder that the conversation about gender is not, gender is not an ideology. No, it's not. But the bedrock actually of fighting for inclusion and pushing for inclusion, not just, Yaga actually led for youth, yeah, right? And it's not, youth wasn't an ideology. It's just that this inclusion actually creates more balanced leadership. It shows in the quality of leadership you get. And I want to break that down, that it's not women for the sake of women. It's not young people for the sake of young people, but that inclusion of all groups in society actually makes for balanced leadership. And if you look at Aisha Yesufu's example of an NSAS movement on one hand, or a protest on one hand, and then when women entered into it, and you put these two together, and the kind of magic you saw, or the kind of great works you saw actually come forth, it shows that, look, you need to add this. In that same protest, persons living with disability actually came out to make themselves known. And it was such an encouraging moment, right? So it also shows that, look, in this movement, when other groups, when you add persons living with disability too, this is what it does. That representation makes people look, oh, look at someone like me, someone I can trust. I want to be a part of this. So I would want us to talk, Cynthia, especially you, because we've had this conversation. You are also working on inclusion for women in electoral reforms. Now, this inclusion, what is it? I've broken down parts of it, but what is the work you're looking at doing? And as people are watching, so they know how to participate and how to actually contribute towards this. So moving from the NSAS movement, you're looking at, I want you to tie it in, women's participation in this movement and what it implies. And then the work for electoral reforms, especially from a gendered lens. So let's hear what you're doing, how we're connecting this to show where we are at and how people can contribute.
Yeah, thank you, Indy. So I think what is important to start, the starting point for me is that democracy is about the people. If it's not inclusive, there is no inclusive governance, then it's not democracy to me. It's just another form of government that is existing. And where we are at the moment, we've not achieved inclusive governance, be it inclusion of women for a gender balanced governance system or governance structure, or even inclusion of young persons or persons with disability. We're yet to get to that point. And that is still a major challenge. So for me, at this point is, how do we translate our power from the street demanding for reforms to political power to influence the outcome of elections come 2023, which is the next general elections. Even before then, we have some off-circle elections coming up and some by-elections coming up. And why that is important is because if we don't understand the importance of our numbers, the importance of what NSAS showed Nigerians, how young people could mobilize. We would also not understand the role we can play in the ongoing reform process, be it the electoral reform or constitutional amendment process. Now, key important things to look out for. Currently, we have the National Assembly, they've started the electoral reform process. We also have the National Assembly, they've started the constitutional amendment process. There's been a call for memorandum by the House Committee on Constitution Amendments. We had that by the Senate earlier some months ago, and people can actually still submit memoranda to both committees in the National Assembly. Now, why is this important? Because currently, our existing legal framework, whether we like it or not, if we don't review and amend it, we would still have challenges of when it comes to inclusion. If we don't have any form of gender quotas in our constitution, in our electoral law, it could take any form. It could be the affirmative action, 35% gender balance, whatever form. But if we're not intentional in including any form of quota in our laws, there will still be a major challenge for women. Now, why? Ordinarily, I would say, no, let women compete equally. But hey, if a system in itself exists to put a particular group of persons at a disadvantage, they would never be able to emerge in an equal or fair process. And that is because the way our political structure is, our political system is, the parties determine a lot of things. We don't have independent candidacy yet. Now, parties determine how much you charge for nomination and all of that. Parties determine who to support for candidacy. For young women who contested in the last election, what they had, for instance, where they had parties, for the newer parties, they won their primaries, then parties said, oh, for you to contest, you need to fund us, you need to support the party, you need to fund the structure, you need to fund the leaders. So you have women are basically asked to perform roles their male counterparts are not asked to perform. You have women basically taxed for funds where their male counterparts are not taxed. It's almost as if you're punished for contesting, that your aspiration is already seen as a threat. So you're punished and penalized for that. So already we have a party system that is not supportive to women emergence. So if we don't have the laws that provide specific provisions, one, for gender quota, two, for regulation of nomination fees for parties and for candidates in an election, three, that regulates party primary processes. That way you also can promote democratic primaries. And then four, that enables deployment of technology. If we don't have our laws amended to achieve these four major important points, for me, there would always be challenges for women. And that is the reality, because we're not having less emergence of women because women are not contesting. No, women are contesting, but women are struggling to emerge as leaders. They have to work 10 times as hard as their male counterparts in the elections. Now, so that is the one angle on the reforms, the Electoral Act reforms and the constitutional review process. But how do citizens come in here? How do we ensure that in whatever we're doing, we're also thinking that, and we're also thinking towards achieving inclusive democracy? Because it's one thing to push for amendments of laws, another thing to have citizens to care enough to push for that. Now, in the past or previous review processes, one major missing link is the absence of a citizens-driven process. That is because oftentimes reform is left to the so-called elites, civil society, lawmakers doing all of the talk. Citizens don't really care. We don't have an agenda as citizens to say, this is what we want as the people to amend our laws. So what happens is, the process is going on somewhere and then we don't care about it. So we're not part of the process pushing for that reform. So if as citizens, as Nigerians, we don't begin to put the pressure now, we can have the process begin and then subsequently someone would decide not to sign the laws. We've had that happen before. And we are almost back to square one. So the critical role we need to play now is that women inclusion is not just a women, it's a matter of a national issue, because you need to have women in the process, you need to have women in leadership positions. But if citizens don't care enough to push for inclusion, the government, which is male dominated, will not see the need to accept or adopt laws to push for inclusion. So we need a lot more citizens. Post the NSAS street protest, as we've learned that we have power in our numbers, that at this level, we're asking our lawmakers, what is your position on the ongoing electoral reform and constitutional amendment process? What is your position? What are you pushing for? Now, this is what we want. It is what we want you to push for. If you don't do that, we are voting you out of office come next elections. Now, that level of threat and political blackmail is what we need to start building upon now. Because whether we like it or not, government has seen our power and they know this and they are worried about this. And they are trying so hard to stifle, to shut us down and shut us up. But we need to understand that this is the point to start making it demands. The other reason why citizens need to reach out to push for that is because if we don't understand the electoral process, we would not understand how elections are won. And I would just bring it down to convention around people saying, I don't want to vote because the votes don't count, or system does not account, or the system does not produce leaders. Number one, votes are beginning to count. Political leaders know that. That is why there's an increase in vote buying. Before, they needed to just have monies to manipulate 2 or 3 people at the top to change the results. But now the monies are going to polling units. Why? Because they said that votes are beginning to count, but the votes that are counting are votes that are bought. So imagine if we can all come out in our numbers. Lagos State, for instance, has about 6-something million registered voters, more than Kano State. Kano has about 5-something million voters, but Lagos consistently has struggled to even get up to 30% turnout in elections. I'm just using Lagos as an example. In the whole of Nigeria, 2019 elections, over 84 million registered voters, but the president won the elections with barely 15 to 15 million votes, if I'm not mistaken, but less than 20 million. What's that saying? That lesser percentage of the people are electing leaders, and we're folding our arms and thinking that is all right. This is the time for us to get our numbers to begin to work. If we cannot mobilize and turn out on our numbers to vote, whoever the candidates that require or need our votes would always struggle at the polls. So for candidates that have intention, that have character, the capacity and the competence, they struggle because they don't have the monies to buy votes. So those with the monies to buy votes, to buy the votes of the few who turn out to vote, if we come out in our numbers, the monies to buy votes will not be sufficient. So you can buy as much votes as you want, but it will never be enough to buy the major voters who would determine the outcome of the elections. So the other angle of getting women to emerge, young people to emerge, is having more voters turn out, because by the time we come out in our numbers, we can then assess every candidate, male, female, young, whatsoever, based on their capacity and the competence, and we are voting based on that. So even if we don't have our laws amended, but we have people emerging towards next election, I know there are lots of young people who want to contest in the next elections. Now, those young people would ride with the belief that they have more progressive voters, voters who understand the importance of their vote and the value of their vote coming out in their numbers to vote. It's not enough to be active on social media. We need to come out on the street. We need to come out to the polling unit to vote. So that is the other angle, that our votes are counting, but the votes that are counting are being bought. If we don't come out in our numbers, we will not change this trend of votes being bought by rogues and robbers who are occupying office currently. So for me, the other point at this level is also how we begin to organize politically towards the next elections. And I'll make this more gender specific, and because we're also talking around women inclusion. So yes, you can have the laws amended, you can have people turn out, but if women and young people are not coming out or are not organizing enough, there's always going to be that challenge. And that also has to do with how we plan our electoral calendar to guide our contest. So anyone who wants to contest in the next election should have begun the work today, because at this point, you need to start building that structure at both the local, state level, depending on what office you want to contest for. Is it state assembly or federal, be it national assembly or executive offices? This is the time to actually have your structures on ground. This is time to start building that social and political capital that you need. And because women will not be able to spend as much money as men do, some women may, but I wouldn't even advise anyone to exhaust their life savings in elections. But what you can use, what women can use to balance out the absent or deficit in the financial strength or power, is the numbers that we build from now. How we organize politically, how we build structures across board, and how we leverage on existing platforms to push our information out, or push our candidacy out. At this point, we need to start saying these are the people who want to run for elections, because voters also vote for people they know. If voters do not know who we are, they wouldn't see the need to vote us. If voters do not connect to who we are, they wouldn't see the need to vote us. And I would always say political parties, lots of parties, we have different parties, but it's always about identifying which party would favor you the most, which party has structures within your system, or if you want to join a new party, which party do you think that belonging to that party would give you the leverage that you need to emerge within your state or your constituency. At the end of it all, the level of political organizing that goes on at the pre-election phase towards the elections, why I say now, because we are barely 2 years to the elections, would always be very important on how women emerge. Because at the end, if people don't know us, they wouldn't be voting us. We need to be out there in the faces of people. So for me, it's about the political organizing, getting voters to understand the importance of the process, and then leading a citizens-led movement to election and to amend the electoral laws, amend the constitution, because if the legal framework is still as it is, our work is going to be 10 times as hard next elections. But if we can at least get those amendments, we can put the pressure on the government to ensure those amendments are actually signed into law. We're going to have a better legal framework that would promote participation in the process and create spaces for more diverse voices to emerge. Women especially, we need a gender balanced government, young people, and then persons with disability. We cannot continue to run our democracy in this state that we have run it in the previous years. We can't continue democracy of exclusion. That's not democracy for me. We have that's a dictatorship, and until it is inclusive, it's not a democracy.
Thank you, Cynthia. I could actually listen to you go on and on, and this is not a bad thing. I'm like, oh, okay. It's like we need Cynthia to keep lecturing people on the need for political participation going forward, which is an integral part of what we're pushing for. And this really breaks things down into perspectives, actually gives that education on what needs to be done going forward, because there's a lot of abstracts going on, and there is people are actually trying to find out. They came out for NSAS, but in the process, oh, wait, this legislator said this person said this, oh, this is happening, oh, yes, this one. Okay, I really want to pay attention to politics now. Sorry. And this is an opportunity to actually teach, to educate, and this is what you have done. And I hope that there are avenues for you to continue doing that. Now, Aisha, let me get to Aisha. Yes, Aisha, from 2010 till now, has there been like, how do you see the change in women's leadership of movements? Is it the case of the more things change, the more things remain the same? Are there new methods women are using? And well, I would answer that by the next question that I'll tie into this. How has globalization, technology, changing norms, and civil society strengthened the voices of women?
Well, for me, I think basically it's still the situation of the more things change, the more things remain the same. And of course, when it comes to issue of fight, especially when you're talking about youth representation, for example, women, male, they all take it on, right? But at the end of the day, you now find that some youth are more youth than other youth because of the gender that they have. And it's no longer where you think you're fighting for the same right, you're fighting for youth representation and all of that. You get to a particular level and you understand that, oh no, wait, at least this male youth are looked upon as, being better than the other youth just because they are female. And in terms of globalization, you see, we're beginning to see in terms of real action, in terms of representation, the fact that leadership, countries where you have more of women in leadership position doing actually much better. There are researches reports that have shown that. We saw what happened during with the COVID-19 pandemic, and the fact that the countries that have been able to actually lead their country extremely well in terms of tackling the COVID-19 pandemic have been countries being led by women. And we've seen a lot of development in countries where you have more women in offices, more women in politics, more women as parliament and all of that, their houses of assembly. And I think the fact that more women are getting into that position of owning and not being embarrassed to own their leadership position. Before now, our mothers, let me just take it back to coming back to our houses. Our mothers did a lot in terms of holding the houses together. Our mothers, our grandparents. But guess what? They always gave the credit away. A good number of them were breadwinners in their families, were the ones who were having to take the slack when the male couldn't provide. But in doing that, there was almost like this kind of a thing of shame for them to admit that they were actually the ones who that were holding the fabric of the family together. So with globalization and seeing what other women are doing, I think women are refusing to be shamed from that position of holding a leadership position, or whether it is protest, whether it is politically, or just in the space of owning their life. And you hear what Yemi Adamoleku said, where she said she doesn't see herself when she's doing things, she doesn't look at herself from the direction of gender. Same thing with me. I don't do label. Call me whatever you want to call me. And over the years, even as a child, I got used to being called, oh, you behave too much like a boy. Oh, you should have been born a boy and not a girl, and all sorts of things. Because anytime they see something happening, they'll always, that a woman is doing good, they'll always want to attribute it to, oh, you are an abnormally being this gender, you ought to have been that gender. And for me, it's a good thing that a lot of women are unapologetically owning their spaces, owning that leadership role. You saw the roles that women played in the NSAS protest, and they are still playing in the NSAS protest, and they're not afraid to own it. And I think for me that is very key, and that's very important. We must learn a lot of the conditioning that have happened over the years, and where women are sort of like, they believe the things that they were told. All the little voices that were planted in their heads, they believe them, and they've been carrying them along all their adult years. It's time to do away with them and just forget about them, and do not allow, most importantly, what is being done. For example, one woman does something, and then it seems as if it's the whole gender that did that thing. And sometimes, because of the condition, you find women trying to, okay, yes, no, forget about it. Like earlier today, someone did a tweet, and he was saying that, oh yes, women leadership is good, but we should be conscious of what Diezani did. And I tweeted to him to say, for every one Diezani, there are millions of Dasukis. And I didn't see anybody being conscious of men being in leadership position because of what the Suki did and a whole lot of other men have done. So why would what the Zaini do be something that every other woman is supposed to pay for? So these are some of the things that really have been happening. And yes, globalization has helped in a way, seeing what other women are doing elsewhere. But most importantly, women should own their voices and ensure that they are being heard. They shouldn't forget about the labeling, and they should forget all the conditioning that they have received over the years and let go of the little voices that keep telling them that they are not enough. We are enough as we are. Any woman is enough as we are. And we've seen it over the generation where women have indeed been the ones to be the backbone of any movement or anything that ever worked, whether it's in Nigeria or around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Aisha. I'll take a comment. Masara Kim says, Aisha, women who succeed, especially in male-dominated careers, are most at times perceived to be a threat, even among the women folk. Whether that's true or not, it's a different conversation altogether. But women have the numbers to institute just any kind of leadership anywhere, but increasingly, women have been opposing themselves. Secondly, women the world over are considered vulnerable, and therefore having women in protest sometimes are not just shields, but a way of bringing emotions into the entire movement, which in turn drives results. Okay, so let me just say one or two things about that. In terms of, there is one statement that is kind of similar to what was presented to Aisha, in the presentation of Diazani. And when we bring statements like that, or we bring the women do not support women, as I'm seeing here, I just remember today seeing, a former governor in the Southwest, his brother was recorded a video on Instagram, basically trashing the governor of Oyo State and saying that, oh, he helped him get into power and he's refusing to share. He's no longer supporting him. None of those. You would hardly find women doing that. In another state in the North Central, a senator, a then serving senator who has now been, through several means removed from his seat in an election that he had first won. At some point, the governor in his state chased him to the point where he told us that he was hiding in trees and all of that. In the political sphere, let me be very specific. The trope of women do not support women is actually not true. It's not true. While you can say that we have not learned to be selfish in a way where we refuse to look at all the other issues and just pursue a candidate because of, gender considerations, all of that, you can accuse women of that. And in that, we're looking at more women entering the space actually gives women more options to, pick from. Looking at electoral reforms helps women candidates to actually approach this space. Educating women to want to join politics, all of that actually helps. Educating women away from the gender roles they have been taught or from the socialization that has been put forward to them is one of the things you can look at. But in terms of, women do not support women, if it is in terms of that and the use of violence or other means to keep people out of the space, I think that it is on the male side of things that you actually find that, and data is there to prove. In fact, in terms of political participation, we do not add to the level of violence, yet we are victims of it. Yesterday was actually 1 year anniversary of Mrs. Salome Abu, burnt to death in her house by a group of young men who actually surrounded her house and set it on fire because she dared to participate in politics, and especially in her polling unit, stayed there and ensured that votes were counted and the right thing was done. They set that house on fire and they watched it till she died. Women do not particularly participate in this kind of violence in politics. And these are some of the things that keep us, out of political participation and out of office. So, there is that. And I would also want to point out that most of the times when I go on television to talk about things, I am giving a very, very excellent analysis on national issues. But when I step out, when people are communicating back, they're like, oh, you were so passionate. You were the emotions you gave. And I remember that in that conversation, I made several points. But those points are not listened to. It's that, oh, Ndi performed for us. You were so emotional, you were so passionate. And I do not see that for men who come on TV or come on any program to say the same thing. So it is not this lens of vulnerability in terms of protest. Can we take that can we take that lens out? If you look at the NSAS protest, the Bring Back Our Girls protest, let us look at the efficiency that women brought to the table in this protest, which is very important. The efficiency or the efficacy women brought to the table in this protest, and the kind of leadership and how that leadership led to the success of the protest, what women brought to the table, and what we did not bring to the table will be, oh, we are considered vulnerable, and because of that, no. The bullets that went out did not look at, oh, okay, we're shooting at the Lekki tollgate, let these bullets go straight to the male folk, or okay, this protest, we will not shoot at it because women are here. No, these protests received brutality, and everybody received this brutality on equal ground too. When we're looking at women's participation in these things, please let us look at it in terms of the efficacy and their actual participation and what they brought to the table. Yemi, I have the next question for you, and that would be around documentation. You spoke to women being part of this movement, being integral part of movement, pre-independence, all of these movements, June 12th, and having their history, their own part of history being erased. So with respect to this, how can we document women's participations in and leadership of movement so that they are role models? How can we go forward to doing that, ensuring that women do not vanish, women are not erased from history? And this works well in presenting role models for women, right? People that others can learn from, and also showing that women belong in these spaces. So yeah, I'm looking forward to your response to that.
Indeed. Before I do that, I just wanted to speak to, you made a point, I guess a comment that someone had made that having women at protest lends to it being emotional or emotions. I'm not quite sure the context for that, because even if we use NSAS as an example, people came out to protest because they could relate to the issue. As I've said several times after that, NSAS was quite different from saying people should, even though it ended up in a larger conversation about bad governance. But if you had called people to come out to protest bad governance or corruption, there's no way you're seeing the numbers that you saw in 24 odd states across the country. But there is an emotional part to looking at the barrel of a gun and someone telling you that I will shoot you and nothing will happen. But so it wasn't, and I'm not quite sure maybe I misunderstood the context, but I don't think people coming out to protest it wasn't for emotion. Women, men, poor, rich, middle class, elites, poor, whatever, across socioeconomic strata, across gender, across age, even though driven mostly by young people, could relate to police brutality. So that comment kind of threw me off, about women almost being used to drive emotional value as being part of protest. But to your question about documentation, I think as the proverb goes, that the hunter would always write history, that until the hunted, rather, or the whatever, I guess that's the way it goes. Until the hunted learns how to write, the story would always be written from the perspective of the hunter. And I think it's just being more deliberate on the part of women. There are a lot of things that have been said about the way that we are wired, not necessarily, excuse me, interested in sharing the limelight. We've talked about women when you negotiate salary increases. We've talked about how women take engagements, take negotiations, take conflicts in the workplace, and how it is different from how men posture. And in the same space in civil society, it's really just movement. It's really just been very deliberate about how we tell our stories. And the beautiful thing, if you tie it to what the earlier panel was sharing in terms of technology, technology invariably allows that to happen. That even without realizing it, people can go back through tweets and comb through who tweeted what first, when, how, who was tweeting, who posted what on Facebook, who was doing what on Instagram Live. So technology invariably, without necessarily being deliberate, invariably allows those stories to be told. And I think also what we've seen probably in the last, 2-3 decades is the rise of, okay, something is going on here that's kind of freaking me out. I'm not quite sure. Because my screen is just changing with different people. Okay, sorry, it was freaking me out. Sorry. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Yes, I was talking about technology that invariably allows you to, by default, document. And also, yes, in the last 20, 30 years, sort of the rise of the sort of notion of feminism. So the deliberateness of talking about the role of women, the deliberateness of talking about the accomplishments of women, or of framing conversations in a gendered way, being very, being more direct about the role that women play, I think also lends itself to a more deliberate stance of documenting the role of women in movements. And I think also being very clear that we don't do the same thing that was done in the past, that we only focus on the ones that are sort of front facing. But also I'm very deliberate about looking at those behind the scenes, who were the ones going to prisons to get people out, medical, who were the ones on the ground, who were the ones coordinating food. I mean, who were the ones managing databases, even something as simple as that, who are the ones picking up phones in call centers, who are not front facing, but also doing stuff that without them, what we then see outwardly will not be possible. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Yemi. And okay, so let's take one question from Hassan Nuruddin. He said, how do we integrate men into this conversation more? And I'm not talking about educated men, but also the very traditional men. I have conversations with my male folks, and it is quite appalling what I hear at times. So who would want to take this question? Yemi, are you interested in responding to this?
Sure. I mean, I think we just also need to be quite clear that, as with whatever we're pushing for in terms of change, nothing will happen overnight. It's a marathon, not a sprint, as we say. So if we understand sort of cultural nuances, and what people have always understood to be gendered roles. So it is women that stay home and cook, and then the man works and makes money. So in a very basic sort of sense, for some people, that's just reality. That's what it is. So it takes a lot. It's understanding that, I guess, as you were saying in politics, to get people from point A to point B, you have to start with them in point A. And so it's understanding that it's a process of unpacking what that means, and what is that rooted in. For some people, it's rooted in culture. For some, it's rooted in religion. For some, it's just rooted in ignorance. And realizing that for sort of each bucket, that you have to do the work of unpacking what that means to them, and showing that it doesn't. I mean, that's what I was trying to remember. Take a National Assembly, for example, trying to pass the gender bill, and the resistance to it from everything as simple as women's rights to own property or to receive inheritance, because in a certain culture it's not done, or women's rights to their body because it violates certain cultural norms. And so those are the things that we have to be aware of and unpack. And so to your point, it's conversations happening within those spaces from men who, so it's a harder conversation for a woman to have with a traditional man, because he already sees you as less than equal. So you now coming and having an equality conversation is a bit odd. So it needs to come from also men who get it, to begin to have those conversations, to unpack, because I am a man like you, and this is how I understand it, and these are the reasons why what you're saying doesn't really make much sense. So that's what I think Aisha wanted to speak as well about it.
Yeah, Aisha, can we hear your thoughts on this?
Yes, thank you so much. And I think most importantly, it's for action, for people to begin to see. So there's a situation whereby it's very difficult for one to get people to understand a perspective if you don't actually play it out for them. So in thinking of the fact that, oh, women are supposed to, they're less of humans, is to explain to them, okay, the things that are happening in the country today, we've had men be there, of what impact has it been? Is your life not affected? When you go to buy something in the market, does anybody ever say to you, if you are male, you pay less price? Or if you go to pay the school fees of your children, being from that male gender, does it make you not to pay as much money as you should? Or just trying to practicalize it, because and I understand something. For me, it's always about that awareness creation, and we must talk to people at their own level, just like what Yemi has said earlier on. Not in a condescending manner, not in a patronizing manner, but just coming to their level and use what their reality is to help them to see things from the other point of view. It's always about paradigm shift. Sometimes people hold on to their views because that's all they know. They have been taught that way all from their childhood. They've been conditioned that way to believe that the men are this and that. And remember what I said earlier on, a lot of mothers even when they were doing things in families, they always attributed it to the father because it was looked upon as almost a failure for your husband not to be able to do certain things. You are the one carrying it on. So they've been used to this lie, this conditioning also. It's going to take a whole lot of work, most especially, engaging with them and letting them see the practicality of things. It's very important also to have men who get it, speak to people more, and also breaking this issue. For example, let me take the issue of, like I was on the 2019, I was on a presidential campaign, Dr. Obiese Kwesili's campaign. And, just going around and meeting people, we traveled around the country, especially within the northern part of the country, and I'm a Muslim, and you find a lot of people are like, oh no, Islam says that a woman cannot be a leader and all of that. I'm like, seriously, one of the things I will sit down and let them understand that, look, being the president or governor or House of Rep member, whatever political put, it's all about economic development. It's all about economics. It's not religion. It's not the same thing as saying that, oh, a woman should come and be the imam in a mosque and come and lead prayers. So just understanding it. I remember speaking in Hausa, I don't know, maybe indeed we have telling Isaac in Kasa. It's about the wealth of the nation. So it's not a spiritual thing. It's not a religious thing, being the president. And then just letting people understand how it affects them. But beyond even the male, the most important comes from even fellow female who have been made to believe that a woman cannot be a leader, and they bought the lie. So you find out that it's not just, you're not just dealing with male men who don't believe that a woman should be a leader or a woman should be in leadership position, but you're also dealing with women who have been conditioned to believe that they cannot be in leadership position. I think it's just breaking the things down for them in the kind of language that they will understand and making people understand. And for me, honestly, one of the things I find that works very well is tough love. If, for example, they say that a woman cannot be in a place, or a woman is, and then when you need money, you are coming to borrow money from me as a woman. I mean, the time has come where I'm going to look you in the eye and tell you, sorry, this money belongs to a woman. And if you say you can't have a woman in the leadership position, then I'm not gonna give you that money because I'm a woman. You should not be collecting money from women. That same 2019, I remember sending a WhatsApp broadcast message, and then there's this customer I have at Wuse Market who I buy this thing, what was it now? Like lingeries and all of that from him. And this is somebody I've been shopping with him for close to 10 years. All my children, right from when my children were got into boarding school from one, I mean, yeah, like from 2011 or thereabout, I started shopping with him. And he sent me a message to say that, oh, that a woman cannot be president. And I immediately sent him a message and I said, a woman can no longer be your customer. And I meant it. He called me, no, madam, customer, it's not like that. I say, it's simple as that. If a woman cannot be your president, then I can't buy things from you again. It's not about looking nice. It's not about anything. I'm going to give you tough love. Women can be in leadership position. Sorry, you're not going to get anything from me. If you like, call me bad. I don't want to be good anyway, because good people die young. Thank you.
All right, Aisha, thank you so much for that. So the floor is now open for comments, and you can raise your hand and the host will unmute you. So the floor is open. Looking forward to anyone who wants to contribute or add anything to the conversation to raise their hands. Masara Kim added to his comments. He says, to explain the point about the emotions in protest, first, from my experience as a journalist, stories taken from the human angle, particularly as they affect women and children, often get more attention than just any other angle. And he says, secondly, in Jos, where I am, women have protested without anyone attacking them, perhaps for the fear of being lashed as clamping down on vulnerable groups. But securities hardly shoot at women protesters. Men, on the other hand, will be instantly crushed. I have been hunted, locked up, and humiliated for speaking truth to power, but my colleagues on the other side tend to be freer. That, however, is not to reduce the power of women, but to say that men in my society don't push women to fight. Women just step out in solidarity with men, knowing that knowing the powers that be will hardly spare them if they came out alone. Okay, thanks for clarifying that, Masara Kim, especially on the angle of, the emotional part of women. But let's also point out that the people who crush men when they come out alone to protest is men. So we can't particularly say that men support men that well, seen as the first thought is violence. And okay, so many women were arrested and beaten by police during protests. I can't get the name of that person. But yeah, looking forward to any questions by anyone, just your hands raised or any comments, and we'll take that. Okay, so I have one hand up, and Olatunde Makanjola. So Olatunde Makanjola, host, please, can he have the floor?
Mute. Yeah, hi, good afternoon, and thank you. And it's been quite a wonderful, informative session. I just wanted to, it's just a comment, about, there was something that I believe Wajebe was saying that the victors always write the history or the narrative of the story of any tale. And the role, Aisha has mentioned it, and everybody from people like Fumi, Lyra Kuti, Madam Nyewura, women have always been in the forefront, but it's the whole dynamics. Why do political parties in Nigeria now, you have meetings at midnight or late? People will joke about it that, oh, they have to do things under the cover of the darkness, but these are those small things that deter women from going as far and doing what they should be able to do, or even do better. You mentioned about COVID. We saw how the Prime Minister of New Zealand and Sweden, how they handled COVID in their countries compared to the likes of Boris Johnson and Donald Trump. But we need to re-educate our own folks and our own gender to see, like, look, women are not our enemies. We have mothers, we have wives, we have sisters, we have daughters. And all this, the cultural background and everything, well, we need to move, whether by force or drag people kicking and screaming into this day. And that job belongs to all of us. Male, like somebody was saying, when they started tear gassing and shooting, they didn't say, oh, we're going to face one gender. They faced everybody. And I keep on telling people, I don't believe that the future of Nigeria, we should wait for the future. Our future is now. Because the same things that people were saying in 59, they said in 79, they said it in 99. And if care is not taken, in another 20 years, we'll be still talking about these same issues. So, but that's just my observation. But well done to everybody to what you've done or what you're doing.
All right, thank you, Olatunde Makanjola. I'm really grateful for your comments, and in that being one of the limitations for women's political participation. Actually, as a woman who is very busy and who is in politics, most of the times that is the time that is clear for everyone to be able to attend that meeting. To be honest, it's not a cult; it's just that politicians are busy during the daytime, and that is convenient. But what keeps women away from this is that actually what they are committed to, be it marriage or something, at some point it's not allowed for them to go to this, and that is a deeper conversation. Women in politics, who allows you or does not allow, and how that conversation does not apply on the other end. Thank you so much to everyone, to our great panelists for participating in all the education that happened here today. Thank you to those who commented. Thank you to Tunde Makanjola. Thank you to Masara Kim and everyone. Really, really great conversations happening. And I would suggest that going forward, this educating that happened here today, because there's a lot of education across board, that it should continue. I know this is going to contribute to policy, but it's also realizing in the course of this conversation that all the answers people are seeking have actually been part of this conversation. And how can we keep it going in a way that people would want to listen, people can partake? So yeah, thank you so much. Aisha, thank you. Baba Yemi, thank you so much for your time. Cynthia Bamalu, thank you very much for your time. And I am again, signing out on this conversation. Thank you so much for having us. Thank you to TechHeart too for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Indy.
Thank you.
Thank you to all the amazing panelists, and thank you again, Indy, our moderator. It's been such an amazing session. My name is Shaya Fayemi, and I am the Project and Policy Officer for Silverchip. There have been so many amazing points raised today at this session. I think that it's very, very important for us to keep the conversation going. I know as women, we're born with that awareness that we're women. From the moment we come out, we're taught that, you know, we should be small, we should not take up as much space. But I think it's very important that we continue documenting our work and telling our stories. And just like the last question, the comments, I think was it Lekon made, it's very important that we unlearn and break free from all the norms and stereotypes that have been tied to just being women. You know, it's a very important conversation that we're having here, and I'm really, really honored that I was able to listen in on this conversation. So many wonderful points have been raised. Thank you so much once again to all the organizers, Silverchip, TechHer, Code. Yeah, and thank you. It's been a great session. I think I will hand over now to Chioma for the closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Shaya, for that. Just want to say a big thank you to everyone who worked in one way or the other towards the success of this event today. First of all, a big thank you to Connected Development for just listening to the vision that we had to not just put on this event, but also to put together a policy brief. We really look forward to sharing that policy brief once it's ready. Also want to say a really big thank you to all of our panelists. These are people that I have, as it were, grown up with, people I have grown to love, to respect, to just really value the work that they do. And so to have all of them on a panel, despite their busy schedules, I know people who had to move things around just to be able to be with us today. So a really big thank you to them. To the teams that worked on this event, so to the people at Silverchip, a big thank you to Nana for all of her work and her support. Thank you to Shire as well for all of the brainstorming and just thinking through. And to my team, to Peter, to Kelechi, to Grace, to Topwave, big thank you to Ubana, who did the fantastic work of putting together all of the graphics. Big thank you. Now to everyone who joined the conversation today, my most profound thanks for spending your afternoon with us. You could have been anywhere in the world, you could have been doing anything on earth, but you chose to spend this afternoon with us, and we're truly grateful for that. We hope that you will continue to engage with us online. We hope you will continue to engage with us offline. And we hope you will engage with the policy brief as soon as it is ready. Once again, a very big thank you to everyone. I think my final words will just be, never stop speaking. Our voices matter. And as we have heard from all of the panelists and the people who participated today, our voices matter. The ways we express our voices matter, and citizens truly have the power to ensure that the things that they want and the things that they demand of their government can be brought to life. So once again, thank you. I hope this event was good for you. We'll be sending out surveys so you can give us feedback on this event and how we can do things better. But thank you so much and have a great rest of the afternoon. Please stay safe. Corona is still outside. Ensure that you wear your masks as you go out, sanitize your hands, and just stay safe. Thank you so much, everyone. Goodbye.